as brilliant as he is unknown. This James Rumsey, the most original James Rumsey, crazy Rumsey to those who didn't appreciate the inventor's wondrous mind. And why is it we know so little about a man who has given us so much? Why did Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and George Washington almost gush about this self-taught frontier blacksmith with a mind like a diamond in the sun?
With the very few tools which they brought with them into the country, they certainly performed wonders. Their plows, harrows with wooden teeth, and sleds were in many instances well made. Their cooperware, which comprehended everything for holding milk and water, was generally pretty well executed. Many of their puncheon floors were very neat, their joints close, and the top even and smooth. Those who could not exercise the mechanic arts were under a necessity of giving labor or barter to their neighbors in exchange for the use of them.
Frontier life demanded a certain genius. Now that genius coursed through the mind and veins of Shepherdstown's one-time blacksmith, James Rumsey, who invented something like a propeller and this tube boiler that was not only the progenitor of the steamboat, but the true beginning of modern steam technology. Professor Edwin T. Layton, Jr. of the University of Minnesota and past president of the Society of the History of Technology, wrote that Rumsey's greatest significance for technology was not in any of the 20 to 30 inventions, but in his efforts to change the very nature of invention itself by shifting invention from a haphazard foundation in craft knowledge to a more secure scientific base.
I first became intrigued with James Rumsey when Dan Tokar, our iron metal artisan and Rumsey scholar, told me that Rumsey could visualize things in his mind that never existed. It was like a laboratory for his third eye. He made them go backwards, he made them go forwards, he added things, he made a widget like this and a gadget like that. And it wasn't long before the residents of little old Shepherdstown began calling him Crazy Rumsey. And why was this so?
Rumsey loved water wheels. He would spend hours studying the water wheels of his mills, noting the lost power in water poorly aimed at the turning wheel's vanes. The dancing water told Rumsey that a steady pressure of water, well aimed at the wheel, gave extraordinary dividends. And, as with water, so with steam.
You know, we all know that books are revolutionary and dangerous. Explosions come off the pages of books. Explosions of the mind. One day, a book landed in Rumsey's hands. This man who was a banger and clanger, Theophilus Desaguliers, was the author of this incendiary volume that changed Rumsey into the man that Edwin Layton described. The book showed Rumsey to experiment not with things, but with ideas. So there was Newton's dictum: for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And for a man who spent most of his days studying grist mills and asking how to get the most power out of moving water, that dictum meant something. It became the jet propulsion that drove one of the very first steam-driven, jet-propelled steamboats. Or at least the world's first jet ski.
In September 1784, Rumsey recognized the incomparable General George Washington entering his tavern.
We already know that on September 6, 1784, George Washington met Rumsey at Rumsey's boarding house in Berkeley Springs, and after a demonstration was quite impressed with the cruder boat invention of Rumsey's, not steam-powered, to the degree that Washington gave Rumsey a certificate of support. That went a long, long way, winning for Rumsey the patent in Virginia, and the and becoming a prestigious advantage in his patent race against his rival John Fitch.
Washington saw Rumsey move ever forward the following March with a new idea to build a steamboat.
Perhaps it was because Newton's third law of motion was taking hold in his imagination, and the tube boiler was coming into view, but he let Washington know of this profound leap forward in his idea of what was now called a steamboat. In a letter, March 10, 1785, I have taken the greatest pains to effect another kind of boats upon the principles I was mentioning to you in Richmond. I have the pleasure to inform you that I have brought it to the greatest perfection.
Rumsey had invented a steam pump later that year and realized that pole boats were too ungainly to succeed.
Robert O. Woods, an American Society of Mechanical Engineers fellow, wrote, Rumsey then decided to connect a hydraulic pump piston, essentially creating an entirely respectable example of jet propulsion. The pump took in water from near the keel and ejected it at the stern of the boat. Aided by a flexible diaphragm, Rumsey successfully demonstrated this concept in 1787.
Washington helped get Rumsey the job that summer supervising an ambitious project to make all the Potomac navigable. With money from this lucrative job, Rumsey began assembling his boat in the fall of 1785 in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. His wife's family lived there. Rumsey saw a way out of his thankless tasks at his job in July 1786 and turned full steam ahead on building his boat. Rumsey and Joseph Barnes, a carpenter, dove into the near-impossible task of building the world's first viable steamboat using just the frontier rudiments of local iron ores, lead solder, tin, the wood from endless forests, and the improvisational tricks of craftsmen from the region. Washington wrote in January 1786,
I would advise you to give the steamboat to the public as soon as it can be prepared conveniently. I will also inform you that many people, in guessing your plan, have come very nearly to the mark, and that one who had something of a similar nature to offer to the public wanted a certificate from me.
On that December 3rd morning in 1787, Rumsey's crude steamboat, with a tube boiler made from cut iron scrap and an engine put together by the brazing process, eased into the Potomac.
Henry Bettinger and General Horatio Gates and many others witnessed and cheered at what Rumsey billed as the first successful steamboat demonstration. By God, she moves, one cried, and wrote Bettinger, after going for half a mile or more to a point opposite what is known as Swearingen Spring, she rounded to and returned, going for some little distance. Thus she continued to go to and fro and up and down the river for about the space of 2 hours. This demonstration and the very last steamboat demonstration of Rumsey's, both lasting only for part of a day, were his only successful steamboat demonstrations, as he was vexed by lack of funds, poor materials, unskilled workmen, and the specter of rival inventors and companies. Yet, all throughout, thick and thin, he was imagining in his mind's playfully protean laboratory a plethora of inventions that have survived and shaped the world we live in today. He wrote Washington in the spring of 1788, Tomorrow morning, I throw myself upon the wide world in pursuit of my own plans, being no longer able to proceed upon my own foundations. I shall bend my course for Philadelphia, where I hope to have in my power to convince a Franklin and a Rittenhouse. To spur him on to new heights, Ben Franklin, another great American who was impressed by Rumsey's ideas, made himself the first to subscribe, and others promptly followed, launching the Rumseyan Society, and they ponied up 200 pounds sterling and bid Rumsey to go to London, where the real entrepreneurial action was. On May 14th, Rumsey wrote his friend Charles Morrow, In 2 hours I shall be on board a ship bound for London with a bill for £200 sterling in my pocket. And the best letters Philadelphia can afford, Dr. Franklin is writing a letter for me. This, Charles, is my meridian. If I do not do something now, I am done.